stuff.
Welcome back, everybody, to Goodwill Podcasting with Connor, Dan, and Stone, your movie podcast that today is discussing one of the most unique directors that are currently working, has a very unique style, gothic, stop motion, you name it. Tim Burton, he's got a new film coming out in theaters this past weekend. We are discussing it today. That'll be Beetlejuice, and we're also discussing three other films from the director. We are discussing Sleepy Hollow, the original Beetlejuice from 1988, and also Big Fish from 2003. Guys, you picked Sleepy Hollow and the original Beetlejuice. Dan, why did you pick Sleepy Hollow out of everything? He's got a wide range of films. Honestly, his first 5 or 6 are pretty, I mean, people say that's like one of the best runs maybe ever for directors. They're pretty solid. What about Sleepy Hollow, stood out to you to pick it?
I think it's kind of Tim Burton really in his wheelhouse in terms of like stylistically what he's comfortable with, and kind of what he does well. Also just that type of New England folktale kind of stuff I really enjoy. So to me, it works. It's a good blend of, the right story with the right director and a good cast. That's a good bit of fun, I think. So I think he's at his best making those types of stories.
I want to say thank you to you because I like where this episode landed, because fans who aren't fans of films, I guess like the Halloween season starts in October, but I feel like a lot of our friends are like, September's here, summer's over, let's get this shit done. So just watching Sleepy Hollow, and we'll get to it a little bit later, and even just Beetlejuice and Beetlejuice, it was really good watching these types of films, like to start off like the spooky season, basically, especially Sleepy Hollow. It's such, I don't know. I feel like anybody can watch that and just get ready for the, spooky season kind of.
Yeah, absolutely. Halloween's one of my favorite holidays. Maybe my second favorite. So I enjoy it.
Really?
Yeah. Thanksgiving is so wildly overrated. So
MLB opening day, first holiday.
Nah. That's normally close to my birthday too, which is nice. But yeah, Christmas then Halloween for me.
Wow. I don't even think Christmas cracks my top 3.
That's wild.
I have no idea. I don't really care, to be honest, about any holidays. I guess Valentine's Day. Hold on. Valentine's Day, my anniversary, and my wife's birthday. Those are three.
Yeah. That's nice.
Is she like a big fan of the show?
No. I don't know if she ever listens to podcasts, to be honest. She likes my TikTok, so I'll take that. I always tell her to watch it till the very end too. I'm like, that helps the algorithm. Why'd you swipe away? Go back, please. Anyways,
not that serious.
Well, okay, I'm not begging that much, but do you guys know that Tim Burton started out with Disney?
What did he start out with?
He just started out as, like, I believe, an animator for Disney itself, and then his first film, I think, was Pee-wee's what is it called? Big Adventure. That was his first movie. But yeah, he started out in Disney, but then, because you can kind of see that style, like he has a very large vision for his films that are very fantastical and kind of animated in a way, especially you can see that with the stop motion. But I also feel like his vibes don't necessarily fit the Disney model. So he kind of just broke away with that. And that was his first film. But like I said, his first movies are Pee-wee's Big Adventure, Beetlejuice, Batman, Edward Scissorhands, Batman Returns, Ed Wood, Mars Attacks, Sleepy Hollow, and then you get to Planet of the Apes. It's like, whoa, okay. So, I mean, the guy, we just talked about Batman last week. I mean, he's just, especially when you look at movies nowadays, I mean, honestly, it went away a little bit with Beetlejuice, and we'll get to that at the end of the episode. But I don't know. I just think he's very unique. And we talked about it before the episode. Dan said that, he's not really a fan of his style. And that's the thing. When you have a stylistic director, like first one that comes to my mind is Yorgos Lanthimos. Like either you're going to dig his work or you're not going to. And, that sometimes makes it or breaks it for a lot of people.
Yeah, and Connor, you feel similarly, right?
Yeah, I'm not a Tim Burton fan, especially the older I got. What is funny though is you asked Dan why he picked Sleepy Hollow. I picked probably maybe one of the more iconic Burton movies with just Beetlejuice 1. Why I picked that actually though is when we were kind of texting in our group chat about what movies we were going to pick, I was also scrolling through Twitter. And for our young folk in the audience who don't know, Netflix, you actually used to be able to rent a DVD and they would send it to you. And I scrolled past a post on Twitter as we were discussing what we were going to talk about that Beetlejuice was the first movie ever rented from Netflix.
Okay, what's that?
It's a good fun fact.
I saw someone else. It was very much a hate post, but I saw someone say that more people, because it said like millions of households, more people watched the original Beetlejuice this weekend than the new episodes of The Rings of Power. Now they didn't mean that in a educational way. They made it a slander towards The Rings of Power, but I still found that interesting with how many people like it. Honestly, this movie or the first Beetlejuice didn't make much money at the box office. I think it made like 70 or 80 million. I think it's like a bona fide, like the definition of what a cult classic is, especially with how well the sequel is doing compared to, how much that first film made.
Yeah, 100%. Well, and that's another reason too as to why I picked Beetlejuice is I know how much of a cult classic it is, but I genuinely don't think I have seen it since I was maybe like 5 years old at my babysitter Donna's house. And so this was
Shout out Donna.
facts. But to me, this was almost like a first time watch because it's the first time I'd seen it in 19 years or however long.
Yeah, I think a lot of people watch Tim Burton stuff like when they're young and maybe really like it, and then maybe you still like it when you're older, but I think maybe sometimes coming back to it, it's not as good. And I think that's kind of how I felt, at least with Beetlejuice to an extent.
So is Sleepy Hollow your favorite then, you would say?
Of what we're talking about today?
Of Burton in general.
I mean, Edward Scissorhands is good, but of what we're talking about today, I really did like Beetlejuice. I like it more than the first movie. Going back, I think the first movie. I mean, we'll talk about it. I just think there's some iconic moments, and a lot of what's around that is just kind of nothing for me. But yeah, Big Fish. I mean, I know we're about to talk about it, but I have some problems with as well.
Yeah, I think that all these movies, though, just coming from him as a filmmaker, are somewhat similar kind of about his life because you can see, I guess, what type of person he is when it comes to his mind and his style towards his art. It doesn't necessarily feel like it fits in Burbank, California, which is where he was raised. And every single story we're talking about, Beetlejuice, I mean, you have Winona Ryder's character, Lydia, who feels really like an outsider in, the world, especially when it comes to her stepmother and her father. And then with Big Fish, you have this son who really can't, who has a father whose mind he has difficulty coming to terms with, and him as a person in general. And then with Sleepy Hollow, I guess you can say Crane is a little bit different than the townsfolk who believe in this, these legends, and he's more of a practical man who believes in science. So, especially, I mean, the most obvious example of Tim Burton's career and his life to, the outside world is Edward Scissorhands, which we're not discussing today. But I still think that you can find a similar story arcs in all of these films that we're discussing today. Maybe the least is Beetlejuice, because, you just had to take what the first one gave you and just kind of do your own thing with it. But I think you can kind of find that connection between all of them.
Yeah, there's always like I guess, outsider type of attitude or like a attempted edginess, I guess, or feeling like outside the system. Even when looking at making the Beetlejuice sequel, Burton talked a good bit about not liking the concept of sequels in general, not liking kind of the big studio system. Him and Keaton, I think, kind of viewed it as, if one of them wasn't there, the other one wasn't. And that movie really was, 35 years in the making, basically. And they went back and forth on getting that made multiple times, went through a lot of different variations of the story. So it was cool to see it finally arrive and not be a mess. So, I respect him there. But I do agree with you in that. I feel like he probably sees himself in a lot of these stories, and I just think his view is so limited, and I think that kind of holds him back in the long run. Especially when you're comparing him to other directors, just have like more flexibility, more actual imagination, and more ability to not put themselves in such a small box.
Now with Michael Keaton coming back after 35 years for not only this, but also The Flash, what was that, last year? Would that have been better if Tim Burton came back for that movie?
I don't know. He had his hands tied.
No one could have saved that. Just conceptually,
he probably would have had to put Jenna Ortega in it, to be honest.
I mean, Jenna Ortega could have replaced Ezra Miller, and it might have been better.
Jenna Ortega kind of really saved his career, I would say, with Wednesday. Like, he was pretty. I think Dumbo was right before that. So the fact that obviously she's the lead, obviously she's not. She is actually a big part of that show, but without that show, I do not know if we would have gotten Beetlejuice this past weekend. Really helped out Tim Burton a whole lot.
Yeah, and then, I mean, obviously they leaned into her a lot for that. It's the same. I mean, it's not the same character, but same general tone, etc. And there's a recognizability. I think she was kind of a window, or like a portal for the new generation to come into the IP and give kind of a safe landing for like financially. So
they're making that third film, baby. They're making that third film for sure with the money in there.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised, and I'm not mad about that.
It have to be soon too, because of Keaton's age, I would say.
Yeah, I'm curious to see, but yeah, do you guys want to get into Big Fish?
Yeah.
Yes. So this was my pick, and I had never watched this movie before, but I was really intrigued by it. I honestly didn't know a single thing about it. I looked at the poster, and I was like, I put it on my watch list for years now. It's like, that looks really interesting. I'll get to that one day. And when this episode came around, when Beetlejuice came out in theaters, I knew this was the one I wanted to pick. I would describe this as best as I can, and it makes sense kind of, maybe, Dan, why you don't like this story when I'm going to say the comparison of the movie it reminds me of, which is Forrest Gump. It feels like this guy going on these random adventures. But there is a very heartfelt story underneath it all. So this is a story about Edward Bloom, who at the beginning of this narrative is an old man who is dying of cancer. And he has this difficult relationship with his son, Will, who I would say is about 35, 40. And Will knows that his father is going to die. And the thing about Edward Bloom and his personality is every time he recalls the events of his life, there's a lot of exaggeration to it, a lot of events that don't make sense or just don't seem plausible. And it seems very fantastical and really appealing to everyone who hears Edward's stories. But to Will can't stand it for two reasons. One is because, especially, we see a scene where his father gets up there and he is, telling a story at Will's wedding, and everyone is fascinated with Edward. And Will's just like, dude, come on, man. Like, this day was about me and you made it all about yourself. Like, what's the deal? Like, couldn't I just have this one moment, just this one time? Really effective scene where they have an argument. But then two, and something that I wasn't expecting, how deep this story would go, is the reason why these stories bother Will so much is because Edward was never in Will's life a lot growing up. Because the name of the movie, Big Fish, is about the fact that Edward Bloom has this gigantic mind and he feels like he doesn't want to be contained. And he always has to be on the move and always has to improve his life somewhat, make it more fantastical by going to the edges of the earth, whether it comes to war or just his hometown or a random town in the middle of the woods. But it's the fact that, Will never had a really good father figure growing up. And this is really a story about two different personalities clashing within the same family. And really, how do you deal with that when one of those individuals is on the verge of death?
Yeah.
So, a lot of stuff. Like I said, I think about this. I was watching this video beforehand, and it's just there's so much to process. There really is, for me at least. What do you guys think? Yeah, I know you guys don't like it as much as I do.
You compared it to Forrest Gump, which I think is almost spot on, perfect comparison. When I finished this movie, I compared it to how I view Up, and Jeremiah said the same thing. I think this movie could be really good as a short story rather than a long movie. I think maybe you don't need all of Edward's backstory and almost just make the third act kind of like this son almost rekindling with his dad. At the end, you can still include some of the stories, just make them a lot more brief. I think it would be much better if this was like a 25 to 30-minute film.
Yeah, I mean, I think this kind of goes in line with what you're saying, Connor. This to me is so incredibly unsatisfying. This to me is almost like an absolute tragedy. It's like this dad that has put up all these walls and just made a lot of shit up. And is there any good to that? Absolutely. There's beauty in like storytelling and mythology and all that. But when you're doing it in your own life to create separation between the people that someone that looks up to you, it just obviously it gets old, and we see that reflected in the son's attitude, and from his perspective as well, his attitude towards his father, even when he's dying, is like so poor. And he's not likable to me. I don't find either of the characters particularly likable, and there's absolutely no resolution. Like the resolution is there's that final scene of the son just kind of caves and he's like, okay, well, I'll tell you a story, and it's like that's nice, but there's absolutely no resolution, and that guy, I think, moving through the rest of his life would have still had all the same regrets that we see throughout the course of the movie. Nothing has changed. I think if they had actually spent more time in the third act of this movie focusing in on the relationship, and it could have been a conversation, something that was substantial in any way, it would have felt a little more satisfying, and I think it would have hit harder emotionally. But as it stands, I just think it feels really empty and like, I don't know, just overly sentimental, and just these stories tend to not do it for me, because when you really think about it, it's not a positive ending in any way. Not that death is ever positive, but I think you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, but you can shed some light on it, and a funeral, like a lot of people say, should be like a celebration of life, not a time for mourning. Be happy about everything, but Will got no closure.
Yeah. Yeah, not at all, and not even close. I think the closest he comes is, obviously he sees a few of the individuals at the funeral, and he's like, oh, okay, like this person was exaggerated, maybe into some extent, but like, okay, they did exist. So that's a nice touch, but it's still just, if he's just still just been hearing the same stories as everyone else, like what kind of relationship is that between a father and son? And I think it just feels a bit all over the place. Like I think a lot of the flashbacks and whatnot just feel like they're kind of jumping around and disjointed, and it's kind of all over the place. And I get that's the point. Obviously, it's dreamlike, it's surreal, etc. So I get it. It's just not something I really like, but I think it was close to something that I could have enjoyed. The third act, it left me a bit turned off to the rest of the movie, I think.
I think it's really interesting because I will say my one gripe with this movie, Dan, is the fact that I do wish at some point the father would have addressed not being there for his son.
Yeah.
But there is a scene where his father is in bed and the son is talking to him, and he's basically saying, just tell me something that's true. And his father basically just goes, I am, like, this is the way I am. Like, if you love me, like, you'll accept that. And it makes me have this weird thought of can he tell the truth? Like, can he not process information in this way? And if you think about it, Will is the only person out of, I would say, the main four, being his wife and also Edward's wife, his mother, or Will's mother, that has a problem with Edward doing this. You know, like Edward's wife also did not, I'm assuming, have a husband. And he was off, always trying to do bigger and better things because he's trying to be a big fish. But somehow, her name's Sandra, somehow Sandra knows that this is who her husband is and she's able to process it, but Will can't. And then you have, you know, Will's wife, Josephine, who understands Will's frustration towards his father, but she also does not process the exact same information in the exact same way. She finds it really interesting and sits there and listens to Edward tell these stories that drives her husband crazy. And Edward's a really likable guy to everyone, including those other two close people in the family, besides Will. Will is the only one who cannot accept the fact that this is who his father is. His father is a good guy, but there is more substance underneath that I wish was addressed, though. And I guess what a lot of this movie is hanging on is the fact that you hope that those dream sequences or those stories are entertaining to you. And I think they somewhat are based on the characters that are introduced in them. You have the giant character. I'm not sure what the actor's name, but everything involving him. And then you get a whole story with Steve Buscemi, which really reminded me of The Village. We watched The Village recently for our M. Night Shyamalan episode, or I did. And I was like, okay, this is kind of The Village, and this came out like 1 year before The Village, this random town in the middle of nowhere. But then you get to see Danny DeVito's ass. Like, I watched that, and I was like, man, Dan's going to love this movie, man. But, I mean, that's the thing. You get the World War II sequences, and it's either your thing or it isn't your thing, but they, you know, you got to try to make these moments as different, as interesting with the filmmaking as you can. And something that I think, though, might go overlooked is the fact that Burton actually does film the sequences differently when it compared to the storytelling to reality. Like, the camera moves in different ways, the editing is different because it is the dream, like the stories, right? It is the fantastical nature, you know, Burton's bread and butter, whereas in the other stuff revolving around Will is a drama. So everything's really, I don't know, literal, you know, cold, you know, just monologues, conversations with the family. It's really interesting. This is out of the movies we're talking about today, which of course 50% of them are just Beetlejuice. This is the most non-Burton-y movie. It doesn't feel like him. Like, it really is a step in a different direction for him. Being half of the movie is kind of a drama.
Yeah, I made that comment while watching it. I want to circle back to what you were saying though about how like his wife kind of accepts who he is, but like Will has trouble accepting that because it reminded me. I don't know if you guys are How I Met Your Mother fans, but there's an episode in season 9 where Marshall has an entire conversation with this woman that he has to road trip with about going to her kids' play, and he makes the comment to her that kids don't understand life; they understand just who shows up. And I think that's why his wife can accept him so much. She's an adult and can understand that's just who he is. But as his son, he's just all he knows is like, oh, dad's never around.
Yeah, I was gonna say they're just like you had mentioned Sandra and Josephine, yeah, Marion Cotillard. Those relationships are just completely different. Like those relationships, first of all, Josephine is an outsider. Like that's someone coming into a family dynamic as an adult and observing. It's impartial. It's not based in that much emotion. Like that's its own thing. In terms of Sandra, like she's older. She's probably along. She met him as a like basically fully formed person. Like as coming into adulthood, she's long since come to terms with his flaws and his ridiculousness and his like emotional stumbling. This is like a defense mechanism. Like this is not like normal behavior. So she's probably come to terms with that. But we're seeing a kid who, in his formative years, dealt with that. So I think it's completely understandable that he has a different relationship to the bullshit than someone who's probably already just over it, and another person who just is viewing from the outside. So I do think you can't really. It's a bit apples and oranges when you're comparing their attitudes. But I do think Will's also just he's an asshole for sure. like his attitude is still, is still overblown and not appropriate for. It's selfish, and it's clearly just something that he never processed, and it's getting in the way of his reality in current time because he's still stuck on that stuff that they never process and they don't process until never. I mean, the movie ends without it, so it's just that's why it's so unsatisfying to me. Because I think Will's just going to end up really messed up by this. So
It doesn't seem like it at the end because isn't he telling him about his like he, you know, goes along with what Edward was saying and like tells these grand stories about his grandfather to his son. And that's the thing too. Very interesting storytelling or thing in the script is the fact that Will is a journalist. So in a way, he does have that storytelling gene in him. He gets that from his father, but he goes a different direction with it. So he does have the ability to create a narrative, to create stories, but more set in real life rather than whatever his father does. So there is a little bit of his father in him. And he just needs the certain push, possibly the death of his father, to create that gene of storytelling.
yeah. I also just think like this. I have the same problem with Forrest Gump. Like this dreamlike, surreal shit being applied to the South. I'm just like, it doesn't do much for me. I think Forrest Gump is like this weird oversimplification of history in a time that was one of the most important decades or couple decades in U.S. history, and it's just like a strange time to apply rose-colored glasses to, and it's one of the reasons I don't like Forrest Gump. And I just think this like, surreal, beautiful view of the South and just this like prototypical life and the white picket fence and like the wife in the apron. It's like, oh, go get him, husband. Like, it's just like, this shit doesn't do anything for me. I don't know. It's a weird, just, I guess, view on life that is not ideal to me. So when I see it being painted in an ideal way, it's just like, it's a little bit strange.
I think a really important moment. I thought this character was funny, just the name, because like I said, we talk about Forrest Gump in relation to this story because they're so similar. But the fact that Helena Bonham Carter's second character's name is Jenny, and I thought that was perfect. But I think when it comes to Will, what is the greatest fear that he has about his father leaving him this entire time is the fact that his father has a different family and is having an affair. That's the number one concern. And he does find somebody who spent a lot of time with his father in Jenny. And there was, feelings there from Jenny toward Edward. But then you actually get the story from her that's not told from Edward's perspective. It is this grand, luxurious story about him reviving a city that he once knew. He knew Jenny as a kid, which is kind of weird because the age, like Ewan McGregor doesn't really change in age or whatever, but it's fine. But I think that might be the turning point when it comes to Will's fears towards his father and understanding him better. He knew that his father was away during this grand amount of time, but he saw what he did and he heard what he did, not from his father's perspective, but from her perspective. And she even said, I tried to make a move on your dad, but he loved your mother so much that he wouldn't even have it, no matter how much time we spent together. So I think that's a very pivotal scene in the story when it comes to Will understanding Edward more. And I thought something was really interesting was the fact that I think Jenny said, your father told me that it's literally his wife, Sandra, and then all the other girls. Like basically all the other girls are the same in a way. And then it's just your mom. So I thought that was really interesting because Helena Bonham Carter plays two different characters. And I feel like they're the two most significant women in the movie, the witch and Jenny. And they're played by the exact same person because that's kind of how Edward sees them. They're all the same. They don't matter. Sandra is the one who matters the most. So I thought maybe that's what Burton was trying to do there by casting the same person. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I also didn't realize he was dating Helena Bonham Carter during this, which
Who was?
Tim Burton.
Tim Burton.
Didn't know
Tim
that.
Burton. Yeah, Tim Burton can pull him. I mean, be honest.
Yeah, I don't think that ended up too well for him, though.
No, probably not.
Yeah,
But kind of like Edward Bloom's life. Not good.
yeah.
But
is there anything you don't like? What don't you like about the stone?
like I said, I don't like the. I wish there's just so there's such an interesting conversation there that is just missed. Like I wish Edward and Will sat down at some point and just discussed a little bit more. I wanted more of an actual real conversation between the two, and I never got that. And then it is, some of the stories are not as interesting as the other ones. I found it interesting. What I thought of is there is this scene where Danny DeVito is randomly a werewolf, but okay. I noticed that like his circus family, in a way, that little person who was like kind of his right hand guy, was trying to kill him. Like he was loading a silver bullet, like as Edward was approaching the band. So I was like, oh, these guys really don't like Danny DeVito that much. But I think a lot of the comedy was pretty solid on me. Like I like everything with Steve Buscemi, how he was a poet and then became a bank robber, and then was like, oh, I found out that the money was on Wall Street. Then he goes makes a living on Wall Street, and then he comes back and like revives the town. And like I said, I just think that having such different stories that necessarily aren't bad, but that have really good actors in them that can carry them, it kind of just all works for me. Like I said, there is a lot going on, and all the stories don't hit sometimes. And I honestly wish that, Burton's style shined even more in the dream sequences. Like I think the most we maybe get is the giant character like pushing the house and leaning it, straight because it was on its side. I thought that was really cool. But that's as much as I got, and I kind of wanted more.
Seeing Steve Buscemi in this kind of annoys me. He's good in this role, but seeing Steve Buscemi annoys me because, like, I've seen him in stuff like this, Fargo. He has one of my favorite roles in any Tarantino film. And then just thinking about where his career went with Grown Ups 2, it just annoys me. Because, like, he's a very good actor. And in those movies, he just plays, like, some of the dumbest on-screen characters I've ever seen.
Yeah, I mean, he did get Boardwalk Empire there for a while, which was such a good show. If you guys haven't watched it, have you guys watched it or no?
I have not.
It's really fucking good. Like,
where's it on?
I think it's on HBO.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe it's on HBO.
Yeah, it was an HBO show, but it's very, very good. It doesn't get talked about quite as much as some other big TV shows over the years, but it's excellent. I also just have to say, I mean, I get fed up with Tim Burton. I mean, all the racism stuff is very, very legitimate with his movies. The conjoined twins, Ping and Jing, in this movie, like, and then
that's almost as bad as J.K. Rowling.
Yeah, man. And then they get to be like circus freaks and like just all, I guess it's the Korean War, like the representation of like the guys doing karate, making all the ridiculous. I'm like,
yeah,
that wasn't good. That was not good.
The only other Asian character in the movie is Deep Roy, who he would come back to use as a fucking Oompa Loompa, and his name is Mr. Soggy Bottom, and he gets to be Danny DeVito's sidekick. It's just like, this shit is just grating. Like it's we're laughing, but like it's genuinely grating to watch, and it just puts me off to this guy. Like
I will say was
to not be like this, and it's just it gets tiresome to me.
I know this is adapted from a novel, so I don't know. Possibly the Jing and Ping characters were from the book. Obviously, maybe that's racism in the story itself, and he could have changed that. But I will say the kung fu like Korean actors, that was I saw that and I just thought of you, Dan. I just thought of this whole situation and the history with that. And I was like, oh, there it is. Yep.
Yeah, and
That's
even
not
even
necessary.
Beetlejuice, nobody talked about it. He has this old fucking Asian guy running a laundromat, like in this ridiculous accent. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing? Like, what are you thinking? What's going through your brain when you're making this? It adds nothing to the story. It's literally just it's so unnecessary and ridiculous. I don't
He
know
just
what
saw
he's
the
thinking.
he saw the success of Everything Ever All at Once and wanted to hop on.
Okay. A little bit different with
Yeah.
that story. A little
He
bit
just
different.
I don't know. It's frustrating, but everyone kind of knows that, I guess, at this point.
What'd you guys give Big Fish?
It was 2.5 or 3. I have to go back and check.
I give it a 4.
I was at 2.5.
Okay, so not terrible. Hey, at least I recommended a movie that wasn't terrible. And Connor, you had never watched this before, right?
Yeah, and I was floating between a 3 and a 2.5.
Okay, yeah.
But the half star for a 3 would have only been because of Ewan McGregor. That's fucking Obi-Wan Kenobi.
I will say too that was interesting is I think there might have been another. You know what? What movie's popping in my mind right now? Have you guys ever watched The Island?
No.
It is a not good Michael Bay movie with Ewan McGregor and Scarlett Johansson. And that I was gonna say this movie took place in between Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, and The Island did too. That movie actually came out in 2005, but I don't know, that just popped in my head for that. Oh, Steve Buscemi's also in that, and Michael Clark Duncan. Damn. Anyways, movie is not good.
Yeah, I gave Big Fish 2 stars. Apologies.
That's okay. This is not a near and dear movie to my heart.
Which was very surprising because I've heard nothing but praise about this on TikTok or other social media platforms.
Yeah, I might talk about this to talk about the episode because
I also think I'm going to.
yeah.
I mean, people. I mean, it's weird. There is this, consensus out there that people don't like Forrest Gump, and then people don't. This is very same to it. And I'm assuming there's probably a lot of people out there similar to not liking Forrest Gump that don't like this movie, like YouTube. But then, obviously, what we look at here is Letterboxd. Forrest Gump's got a 4.1. And this has a 3.9. I mean, that doesn't mean anything, but I think it does mean the majority of people do enjoy whatever these kind of stories are called, episodic journeys of a character. I don't know.
Well, I think
That seem unbelievable.
I think people on a surface level, when they think of Big Fish, was like, oh, it's a father-son heartstring tugger movie. And in reality, it's like it's really not, which is the irony of it to me. But that's what people, I think of when they think of Big Fish, which is kind of funny to me.
I think
the dynamic is just like so bad.
I would say there's such an interesting conversation there, though, about a father and son trying to make amends, like being completely different and trying to fix everything before the other one passes away. But every new story you tell kind of just deducts what you're trying to feel there. You're like, you don't want necessarily for the stories to happen with DeVito and Buscemi. You want more of the realistic. You want to see the interactions between the father and the son, and you don't get that as much as you want to. Like, that's a gripe I have. I found that part of the movie more interesting than the other segments, which I think is kind of a problem.
Yeah, no, I'm with you.
But yeah, so a little bit different from Tim Burton. You can kind of see his style a little bit in this, but
If I didn't know before this episode or like how into movies I am, but like if I would have turned this on like a month ago, like just scrolling through a streaming service, I would have guessed that this was Burton.
It's really hard. I mean, you can say I didn't know this until we watched all these movies and I thought about it. He does have some key actors that he uses. I guess the only one I can think of, and this is DeVito. He uses DeVito quite a bit.
And Helena Bonham Carter.
Yeah. That's because they were dating, But yeah, like you said, I wish this had more of that. But like I said, I don't think the storytelling segments. I get why they're there, but they take away from the father-son thing. So frustrated. Like I said, I did enjoy it, and there's a lot of interesting conversations there about giving in to someone's beliefs. That way you can love them for who they wanted to be rather than who they are. See, that's just such an interesting thought. But I think this could have been somewhere in there a 5-star movie. It was just really difficult to kind of tell it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you.
You want to move on to the best movie we're talking about today?
Yes.
Oh, damn. So Sleepy Hollow came out in 1999, supposedly the greatest movie year ever in history. And it is from the short story that everybody knows. Who wrote the short story again, Dan? You know.
I don't remember.
Oh, damn. I'll put you on the spot there. But you follow Ichabod Crane. There you go. You said who?
Washington Irving?
Washington Irving. Okay. Yeah, you follow Ichabod Crane, who is a young...
Ichabod Stone. Ichabod.
No, it's Ichabod.
God,
Yeah, you're right.
You uncultured fuck.
Ichabod Crane is a young detective who likes gadgets and science. And the people around him do not like him or his gadgets. So they kind of send him away to Sleepy Hollow, where these murders are going on about people getting decapitated by a headless horseman. And so he tries to solve this mystery, I should say. I'm struggling. And he meets a beautiful young woman there named Katrina, and also some conspiracies and some drama in the town. That looks very beautiful because it's Tim Burton, and he's really good with practical effects. And severed heads look really good in this movie. But I will rest my case because I said Ichabod instead of Ichabod. Guys, why do you like this movie?
Dan, I'll let you start. This is your pick.
Yeah, I just think we talked about this a little bit before. I think Burton has a really kind of narrow view and a narrow kind of lane of what he does well. And I think this is him doing what he does well. I think the Southern Gothic stuff with Big Fish just doesn't work as well for me. I think this type of story is perfect for him. I think visually it's right where he should be. I like the practical effects. I like this is basically just like kind of like a low budget slasher. It's pretty gory. I think it's funny. I like Depp's performance. It's a little bit of like Sherlock Holmes, maybe a little bit in a way, but a little less likable. You can tell he kind of annoys everyone around him, but he's also good at what he does. It's a very funny movie. It's ridiculous. I think it knows it's ridiculous, and it's kind of hamming it up. And I like that. I like when he's not taking himself too seriously, not being like melodramatic, just having fun. And I think that's what this movie is. It's fun. It's a great Halloween movie. And like Ichabod Crane and the Headless Horseman like is a classic story, and I think it deserved a retelling like this. It is a little convoluted when you when you get into it. Like you really have to pay attention to this movie to understand what the fuck is going on.
Yeah, when he pops up in that book with all them names, I was like, wait, hold on.
Yeah. But at the same time, like if you're paying attention, it's not. You can kind of see what's coming from, a little bit away, but I enjoy it. And Christopher Walken looks absolutely insane in this movie.
Yeah, he does it. I don't think he says a single word in this movie. He just goes, ah!
Yeah, but the look is good.
He was cracking me up the whole time.
You like it, Connor?
I really enjoyed this movie. This is one I could turn on again when we finish recording and just have a great time with. What was funny though is I got a little distracted there in the first 20 minutes, just because I was like, "This is Harry Potter and Star Wars just combined with just the cast."
Dude, that fucking rocked! Like seeing all these guys all together, I was like, "Hell yeah!" And
Yeah.
I haven't watched a whole lot of movies with him in it, but I knew Michael Gambon's name, and I was like, "Holy shit, it's Dumbledore!" Like I got pumped. I'm like, I've never seen him without a beard.
I had the same reaction when I saw, I forget the actor's name, but Emperor Palpatine.
Ian McDermott. No,
Yeah.
Ian McDermott.
Yeah, Ian McDermott.
But-
Christopher Lee is Dooku.
Count Dooku.
Yeah.
Yeah. But no, I had such a good time with this movie. I think honestly, my favorite scene, if I had to narrow it down, would be the one when they're looking at the decapitated body and Johnny Depp pulls out those ridiculous glasses to like magnify it. And what also was funny, like, because Johnny Depp is like pretty, like, I feel like you can see a lot of his work in everything he does. But I feel like that scene alone just reminded me so much too of a movie we just talked about, Rango, and the way he's just like faking this confidence to like as a cop in both.
Yeah,
I
that's the
don't
thing
know.
that's really interesting. Is like he's not a hero in this. He kind of is just like a goofball and like a coward, and kind of is there because he has to be, not necessarily because he wants to be, kind of a thing. And he's just slowly uncovering these mysteries because he's kind of into this girl, so he kind of wants to stick around.
Yeah, but he definitely gains the confidence throughout the movie when he decides to turn back.
Towards the end, when he like falls in love with her, and then he's like, "I need to save her," you know.
Yeah, and that whole sequence where on the carriage and like him and the headless horseman are fighting was just awesome.
There's like so many, like all the practical action. I use action the term very lightly, but like I think about that, everything with the horseman looks so damn good. But then also like the windmill scene where they're like on top of that and they're like spinning trying to come down to the ground, that looks so good. And those are like practical sets that they're grabbing onto, that are moving, and I'm like, damn, man. Like,
I was,
yeah, like you said,
this
it's kind of, I do like the like you said, Dan. I mean, this is why we had these conversations. This type of atmosphere and story and period piece, I think, does fit Burton a little bit better. It's more suited for him rather than Big Fish.
Yeah, this is my favorite set, I think, out of all the Burton movies I've seen. Even with the way like New York looks compared to Sleepy Hollow and the way it looks. I love all of it.
Yeah, this movie to me, like I said, it's just fun. I like kind of the history aspect of it too, with him being like a Hessian soldier. Um, and Ichabod he's kind of annoying, but I feel like I think Tim Burton's like an annoying director, so I feel like annoying characters like Beetlejuice and like this allow him to just like do that well. I think that's a strange compliment, but I think it's true, and I think that's kind of what he does best.
I will say something that really disappointed me though, because I mean, it's a good and a bad thing. Good, maybe, or bad for my entertainment of my life so far to this point, but a good thing because I was surprised by the stories. That I've never read The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. I didn't know anything about Big Fish going in. I obviously knew about a headless horseman, but that's about it. So I was a little bit disappointed as to what the story became or was, which is basically just a whodunit. Like you said, Dan, it's kind of just a slasher film. Dudes die, and then you have this giant monologue at the end of someone explaining how they did everything. That story feels kind of superficial to me. Like there's not a whole lot there. They do try to do something with Ichabod's backstory, with his mother kind of being into witchcraft and his father not necessarily, loving it, and he murders, his mother for what she's done. I was like, wow, this is really interesting because, Ichabod has this mindset where he prefers more science over, the whimsical, haunting supernatural like his mother was into, and that makes complete sense for his life based on what's happened and the circumstances of his past. But then I feel like once he gets more of I feel like that was kind of just because he confessed that to Katrina, I believe. He told her that story. And after that, it's kind of just abandoned, and we really don't see it again, anything about his past for like the last 35, maybe 30, 35 minutes of the movie. That was just really disappointing to me because I felt like that gave him so much depth. And maybe you didn't necessarily need that in this movie because it is a fun, I wouldn't say this is necessarily a horror film. It's a Halloween movie. There's nothing really about it that scares you. Obviously, the characters appear scared in the film of this headless horseman chasing them, but I feel like it's the way it's shot is more of like an adventure rather than actually trying to frighten you. But yeah, everything with I wish we got more of Crane's backstory. I thought that was really interesting in the turn of the century that's happening, the time setting where this is taking place. I don't know. I feel like there's a missed opportunity there somewhere. And like I said, it's just a whodunit with a big monologue at the end. Taking apart all the practical effects and the atmosphere and the cinematography and the performances, which all those do play into the quality of a film. But if you just look at the story itself, it's kind of not the best interesting. Like you said, it's kind of convoluted sometimes, Dan. So that's where I wish it was just a little bit better. But then you look at the actual Legend of Sleepy Hollow, there's not much there they could work with. So they had to come up kind of with something. And this is what, a fun slasher movie is what they came up with, which I would recommend this movie to anybody. I just don't think the story is that great.
Yeah, and this isn't a movie that I'm like looking for any type of story. Like I don't think Tim Burton's like a great writer, so I just don't anticipate that. But yeah, I think it's just supposed to be fun, and I think like again, fun is what he does best. So yeah, I think he's kind of more better at creating atmosphere than I don't really know what depth you can put into this story.
I wanted to add an interesting fact though of something you said because I heard it somewhere and I've tried to keep it in my mind is the fact that Burton actually doesn't write any of his films. So this is actually not Burton. He hasn't wrote in a single one of his films besides his Frankenweenie short film that he wrote in 1984. Not a single one of his films he writes. He directs them. So I guess it's the people who wrote it for him didn't do that great of a job. But yeah, all he does ever is direct, which is kind of funny because people are like, oh, Burton's such this visionary and, look at what he's done and all the, Beetlejuice. Wow, look what he came up with. I'm like, okay, there's also a writer there. He's not the writer of Beetlejuice.
I mean, changing industry, it's how Drake got famous.
He does, I will say, actually, hold on. Okay, so he did, some of what I said was just true. He has written his stop motion pictures. So it does looks like he has writing credits on. He didn't direct The Nightmare Before Christmas. That's a very common misconception. Henry Selick directed The Nightmare Before Christmas. It's just called Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas because he just has a big name. And he
Same with Coraline.
Yeah, it's not called Tim Burton's Coraline.
Well, no, I know, but like a lot of people say the same thing about Coraline.
Yeah, and that's something I appreciate about Burton is that he did like reignite the stop motion genre, I would say. Like he does care about it a whole lot, and I really do like that genre, especially being an animation fan. But yeah, it says right here he was the original writer on The Nightmare Before Christmas, Corpse Bride, and then the Frankenweenie movie that he came out with in 2012. But yeah, everything we're talking about today, though, he did not have a part in the story whatsoever, which is surprising when it comes to Beetlejuice, because like you said, Dan, that movie was ticking. They were writing this movie kind of for like 2 decades, 3 decades when it comes to Beetlejuice, and they're trying to just figure out what the hell it was going to be.
One thing we're forgetting to bring up too, what makes this movie great, and for the last one too, it was Danny Elfman's score. That
Danny
man
Elfman goes hard.
I'd put him in the A tier of composers. Right behind like John Williams and Hans Zimmer. And
I believe the only nomination, I remember just looking this up right before we started recording, the only nomination that Big Fish got was actually for Danny Elfman's score in that movie for the Academy Awards. Yeah.
Another movie that Danny Elfman has also done the score for is Good Will Hunting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like people don't
researching for this episode.
I don't feel like people talk about him when it comes to, composing music, which is such a bummer. I don't know why. I don't think maybe he does poor scores. I've never heard one from him that's been bad, but I don't know. I guess his stuff isn't as flashy or thematic as other people whose names get thrown out there.
Yeah, I'm definitely a fan.
Yeah, I appreciate this though, Dan, for having us watch this because this will probably be kind of a staple Halloween. Like I would put this on for anybody. Any of my friends who don't like movies or don't watch movies, like I can't, like I said, this necessarily isn't a horror film. I can't throw on horror films for my friends. They wouldn't like them. They would get scared of them. You really can't get scared.
It's definitely a horror movie. Like I think how it's sold is like goth. Anything supernatural like this is horror, but I mean, horror is the actual scare element of it is just something that's subjective. I feel like, but it's definitely a horror movie.
Yeah, well. I don't know. I don't think there's a single sequence in this that is trying to frighten you. I think maybe the atmosphere kind of. It feels more thematic though, rather than terrifying. Like it feels beautiful.
What do you mean it feels thematic?
I don't know. It feels really appropriate and realistic for the time period it's set in. Like, it feels beautiful to me. And I don't know if that's just because I'm a lover of movies and I just am looking at all the small details that Burton puts into it. But I'm not looking at this giant windmill being like, I'm looking at this giant windmill and be like, holy shit, that's a real thing. And I don't know. It's just not framed. I don't think there's a certain scene that's supposed to frighten you. Like when someone gets their head chopped off, like, I'm trying to think of the actor's name, but when, let me see here, Richard Griffiths, when he gets his head chopped off, it like spins around like 6 times. Like, that's kind of fun in a way. There's a lot of humor in this movie. So
there is, but you could also argue that the part where Christopher Walken's eyes like come out of his skull when he puts his head back on, like that could be classified as like a horror part that's going to scare some people.
This isn't like what genre are you saying this is? Like every single place you look, this is definitely classified as horror.
I know. Well, here's the thing. Would you also classify Beetlejuice as horror?
I mean, I don't know. I can.
Well, I was just saying because, yeah, that'd be interesting because obviously Beetlejuice deals with ghosts in the afterlife, and usually when it comes to, those types of characters or those types of beliefs or whatever, that's usually horror movies, Poltergeist, all that stuff. But people have fun watching Beetlejuice. So just because something has the elements of a headless horseman killing people doesn't necessarily mean it. When people say horror, I feel like they picture one thing in your mind, and that's probably what I'm doing right now, and probably maybe what I shouldn't be doing. But I envision movies that are trying to scare me or things that frighten me. And this is it is horror, but I don't know.
People have fun watching like Jaws, Paranormal Activity. People have fun with anything.
Yeah, horror's supposed to be fun, I think.
Oh, yeah. I guess horror in my mind is like something to be afraid of. Movies that possibly could be scary to someone. I mean, I don't get scared a whole lot, but I don't think that I have friends, like my wife doesn't watch horror movies, gets frightened. I have my best friend, Grant, doesn't like horror movies, gets frightened. I would show
your co-host.
Look at that. Connor, look at that. So you watch this. So that's kind of where my mindset is at when I come to the term horror. And then again, it's just a stupid term and it's just a stupid thought I have. This is definitely a horror story. I'm just glad that it's one that is accessible to a lot of people, that can be watched on Halloween by everybody. That makes me super happy. And that it's fun. It really is.
Yeah.
That was an interesting tangent. I didn't expect to go on that. Me just saying it was not a horror movie. It definitely is one, but that's kind of what I mean is that, I don't know. I'm glad it didn't frighten our co-host, Dan. Good job.
That's good.
I don't think Burton would make that type of movie.
Would you guys rank this one?
I gave it a 3.5.
Stone?
I gave it a 3.
I gave it a 4.5.
Damn! Shit, Cotter.
I love that.
I loved this movie.
Look at that. And didn't scare you. All right. You want to get into maybe his most popular film, Beetlejuice?
Yeah.
So this is probably my favorite one that we're going to be discussing today. So this follows a couple who unfortunately die in a tragic accident when their car wrecks over this bridge and falls into the water. And they don't necessarily know they're dead. They come back to their beautiful architectural marvel of a home and realize that everything is not what it seems. They quickly figure out that they're dead. And then you have this family, the Deeks, I believe, correct? Yeah, the Deeks, sorry, who move into their home, who basically are starting to renovate, especially Delia, Catherine O'Hara, and her friend. What was her friend named? Otho. They are just trashing the entire place, saying we're going to tear down all these walls, we're going to renovate, and that really hurts Adam and Barbara emotionally because this was their most cherished possession. They had a realtor who came in at the beginning of the film trying to convince them to sell it because it's too big for them and they can't have kids. Really an asshole moment. But as I think it's called The Netherworld, they find out that there's the book of do you remember what that book is called that they pick up in this film? It's got a specific name to it. we're really struggling here when it comes to the facts of Beetlejuice. It's called classic. I know the book's called a specific thing. But it basically gives them instruction on how to be a dead person and how to gain access to the netherworld. And down there, I believe they find out about Beetlejuice and that they shouldn't contact him. But he is trying to get out into the open as much as he can, and only can do that if someone calls out his name 3 times. But the Maitlands, that's the name of the couple that passes away. They get so desperate because they cannot scare this family that they call on Beetlejuice, and he kind of takes it from there. And they kind of let the juice loose. There we go. Hey. And at the end, they have a tough time containing it. But I think for me, what really makes this film is the character of Lydia. Winona Ryder, is so good at playing. I mean, she's a goth. That's what she is. This really popularized the goth look and the goth feel, I think, when this originally came out. And she has a tough time just processing the world. And rather than accepting her father Charles and her stepmother Delia, who Catherine O'Hara is kind of a bitch in this, they kind of just think she's weird. So in a way, when she finds out about Adam and Barbara, she feels like she has more of a connection to the dead rather than the living. And there's something dark there where she tries to kill herself, and Barbara and Adam convince her that that's not the way. Like, life doesn't get better on the other side. It's not different. Like, you have to learn to live. Like, basically those two would live if they could, Adam and Barbara, but they're not. And I think Delia, and I think she's like the soul of this movie and the heart behind it, and what her character goes through. But I also came out with this crazy theory. I don't know if you guys saw it, but the fact that this is also about basically the incorporation of modern design, of contemporary design, which I think is really interesting. Because like I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, Tim Burton is really like Lydia, very much gothic, horror kind of stylistic director. Edgy, and we see sequences of him obviously in the Elseworld. But when Delia comes in, she redesigns this entire house into very bright colors and shapes, and doesn't really feel like Burton per se. It kind of does, but not at the same time. And then I feel like, especially towards the end, when it comes to Lydia's character, they're trying to change her. Beetlejuice literally changes her, takes her out of her gothic clothes, her black outfit, and puts her into this bright red dress, signifying the fact, like, changing her, who she was into who he wants her to be. So still at the end, and then Delia and Delia, her stepmother, and her father, come to terms with finally caring about her daughter and wanting to save her from Beetlejuice, which I think is pretty fitting. I will say the one thing about this movie that I'm not a big fan of is it kind of moves really fast at the end. It goes super quick. And I wish this movie could have been 2 hours long, in my opinion. There's a lot there. A lot of people say the most famous thing about this movie is that Beetlejuice really isn't in it that much. He's only really in it, I believe, for 15 minutes maybe. And when he's there, it's kind of like lightning in a bottle. Michael Keaton is the jokes are just rattling off so quick, and they're really effective.
Yeah, but if you look up some of the most iconic characters in movie history, it's kind of like that. Like Darth Vader was in the original trilogy for like 18 total minutes. Like Anthony Hopkins in Silence of the Lambs was only in it for, I think it's like 12 minutes.
Maybe that's like the key, is like memorable characters are memorable because you wish you could have gotten them a little bit longer. Like, they stay with you. They weren't overexposed.
There's a big thing going around social media right now about aura. Like, every character we just talked about has aura. Maybe that's why.
I would say Dan has the aura of Beetlejuice. I agree.
I also think we saw the same thing with Fade Ralpha with Dune. Like, a character that's just there for a second, and you're like, oh, whoa, like, this is surprising and different, and just something that maybe you haven't seen before. Obviously, the design of Beetlejuice was iconic. This movie, the practical effects, I think, kind of make it. I think without them, and one of my biggest concerns was when I first heard about the Beetlejuice sequel, I was like, in my mind, I was picturing this just like CGI bullshit ass movie that would just be unsatisfying. I'm not even the biggest fan of the original movie, but I do respect it. And it was definitely special and iconic. But thankfully, the sequel was not like that. But I think, like I was trying to say, the practical effects are really what makes this movie. I think that's kind of the fun of it and what keeps it like light and fresh and exciting to the audience.
I will say there is one sequence that is different from Beetlejuice to Beetlejuice, where they use CGI rather than practical effects. That kind of bugged me. I don't know what the place is called, but it's that sequence where they go out of the boundaries of where they're supposed to be.
Where the sandworms are?
Yeah, the sandworm. And in the original Beetlejuice, the background kind of looks like watercolor. It's a very it kind of looks like a green screen, but it's like it doesn't feel like a traditional green screen at the same time. I don't know. It just feels like there's some texture to the background along with the stop motion sandworm. But then in Beetlejuice, the sandworm is definitely stop motion, which is incredible. But that background, it just looks very CGI green screen. So that was the one moment. It's really nitpicky, but that's the one moment I noticed. I wish that still looked like the original. But yeah, the practical effects in this are really ridiculously good. I mean, that's what Burton, and in all of his movies, that's kind of what Burton's great at.
I don't know. I'm kind of with Dan. Like, I'm not crazy about this film. It's not what I'm dying to go back and watch. Like I said in the beginning of our episode, it's been probably 19 years since I've seen this movie. And when this kind of, finished up, because this movie's shorter than I thought it was. It's only like an hour and a half. But like when it finished, I just was like, okay, like I wasn't like, that was great. I understand why this is such a cult classic. And I also wasn't like, that was the worst movie I've ever seen. Like I had fun in parts, but it's not something I'm dying to go back and rewatch. It's probably not something I'll rewatch next Halloween season.
I think maybe the reason people like it so much is because it takes the horror trope of ghosts and just makes it non-scary and accepts it right away. And everything about the Elseworld too. Like the real villains of this story are the humans that are alive rather than the ghosts. Well, and I think that's why maybe people are attracted to it, because it just feels, especially when it released in 1988, that just felt kind of different and fun too.
Well, and add on to what you said earlier too, is you said it kind of, popularized almost like the goth look, which I don't know if you guys saw, but Winona Ryder just did a speech. I think it was on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, talking about like how Tim Burton allowed her and like other people to be more comfortable in their skin with how they wanted to dress or express themselves. So, I mean, there's a positive behind that with all the shitty things we have said about Tim Burton. Yeah. No, I know, but like
very small subsection of people. Yeah.
Yeah. No. And then at least we got Winona Ryder out of it,
Yeah. No. Absolutely. What you were kind of talking about just there, Stone. I think. I mean, when Burton had this idea, this movie's a ripoff of Ghostbusters. And it's just take Ghostbusters and flip it. That was the idea when they kind of came up with this. And I think the fear was that it would just feel cheap and feel like it was a ripoff, but they were able to craft something unique. And it's obviously not known as, doing that. But that was kind of the original thought process, which is a fun idea. I also kept Alec Baldwin in this movie looks exactly like Glenn Powell, exactly like him.
Alec Baldwin looks pretty sly in this movie. I'm not gonna lie, he looks pretty good in this movie.
I also didn't recognize that was him when I turned it on.
He's pretty handsome in this, man. I'm like, okay,
you're pretty handsome, Stone.
I appreciate that.
But seriously, put him and Powell next to each other in this. It's crazy. Like it's very, very similar. It's odd.
I'm gonna be looking that up after this episode.
Yeah.
And probably clipping this.
Just us talking about how good looking Alec Baldwin is. That's our takeaway.
It's not the
from
most
Beetlejuice.
out of pocket thing we've talked about.
No.
It is insane. I think this is one of those ones where you can't necessarily separate the actor from the character. They just feel like they were born to play it, to be honest, when it comes to Michael Keaton and Beetlejuice. Just the way he speaks and moves his body is just it's so special, and it just captures you. And that's like, as soon as he's introduced, and it's the same way with the new movie. It's like every second with him on screen is gold. And I just feel like there's more segments of good material without him in this movie than there was in Beetlejuice and Beetlejuice for me. But just the way he's like, I can't remember how many times. I
I
can't
could
remember
not
how many.
disagree more. When he's not on the screen in Beetlejuice, I'm really struggling. It feels like really disjointed to me. I don't know, but I also just think his like I appreciated that in the second movie they dialed back like his rapiness because it's uncomfortable. It's weird. Like in the first movie, I think it's just like it's a little bit too much.
That's what originally, I believe that's what originally the script had for him to do. And that's good that at the end with Lydia. I truly believe rather than marrying her, I think that that's what he was supposed to do with her. And I'm glad they didn't because
Yeah.
if that was the case, not only there would not be a Beetlejuice right now. No one would talk about this movie ever. So I'm glad that someone had some common sense back in 1988.
Also, this is rated PG. He says fuck and then grabs his balls.
80s were different, man. I mean, is this before or after Temple of Doom? This is after Temple of Doom, I think, right? Because
Is
Temple
that
of
what
Doom is the
kind of
one that.
shifted the ratings?
Yeah, so Temple of Doom was PG, but that movie was so fucking hardcore that basically it created the PG-13 rating. They're like, holy shit, they ripped some dude's chest open and there's a heart beating in his hand. Like, come on, bring your 10-year-old kids to that. So yeah, Temple of Doom is what started the PG-13
I never knew that.
rating. Yeah, fun fact. Good job,
Yeah.
Spielberg.
But I mean, I do like Keaton in it. I like the designs. I just the ghost couple doesn't do much for me. They're kind of boring and bland for me. I don't know. I ended up liking. I feel like I like Catherine O'Hara better. I think she's a lot more entertaining in the second movie.
Catherine O'Hara is just such a good actress. I love Catherine O'Hara.
Have you guys watched Schitt's Creek?
Yes.
My wife got obsessed with that. So dude, she's hilarious in that. Anyway, go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, and I think the banana boat scene just like did this movie a huge favor by like giving it an iconic moment, like I don't know, top. I'm not going to come up with the number off the top of my head, but minimum top 100 movie moment got put into this movie, and it's a moment that like doesn't do that much for me either, but people like it, so yeah, I think it kind of lucked out with that though, because I think it picks up the movie in kind of a lull.
Speaking of Catherine O'Hara, I wanted to shout out one of our listeners and guests, Vets Movies, because when he was on the show, he recommended Best in Show, a very funny comedy that has Catherine O'Hara in it and Eugene Levy. And I really enjoyed that. So thanks for recommending that, Vets. But I will say something that you said about Beetlejuice that I feel like people maybe forget is you said that the Maitlands don't necessarily do it for you. I said maybe the heart and soul of this movie is Lydia, but I think maybe more importantly is her relationship to the Maitlands. And not only the fact that they help her, but she helps them. Because, what's really important, that little phrase that's mentioned at the beginning of this film is the fact that they can't have kids. And then at the very end of the sequence, basically Lydia has become their child. And Lydia, which maybe isn't the best thing in the world, I feel like she feels more close to the Maitlands than she does her father or her stepmother. But it's the fact that, they can live in the house and they're happy living in the house with the Deeps. But now Lydia, in a way, has become their daughter. And they have helped her through tough times. And she's happy being who she is. And they're happy with her living there. And they have come to terms with one another. And they're kind of a big, happy family. So this tragedy that has befell them at the very beginning of the story has actually turned into a positive by the end.
They could probably do more if they were alive.
Oh, okay. They couldn't have a daughter though. I mean, yeah, but
I don't know. That's one of my biggest gripes with the movie is how they actually die though. Like with the bridge, and the dog is somehow managing to hold their car up on the bridge, and once it jumps off the one board,
it's comedy, dude.
I understand I'm nitpicking, but that's annoying. I don't like Tim Burton, right?
Yeah. I also just think like this movie is nowhere near long enough. I don't think like for what it's trying to do. I think it like I mentioned earlier. I think it feels really disjointed. I think maybe an extra half hour would have helped it, but it's just too short, in my opinion.
Even an extra 15 minutes, I think, could have benefited.
So remember when I mentioned the fact that Beetlejuice, that scene towards the end with him and Lydia, was supposed to be a lot more graphic. The scene you mentioned it, Connor, made me think of it. The scene where they actually die was supposed to be a lot more graphic too. It says in the original script, it was far less comedic and much darker. The Maitland's car crash is depicted graphically, with Barbara's arm crushed and the couple screaming for help as they slowly drown. Can you imagine if that was in this movie? Connor's like, yeah, it would have been a lot better. I just sound like Beetlejuice there.
I might like it better, but I mean, I also kind of like darker shit. Like, I don't know. Like, I mean, I think it's why maybe I like Death Proof more than a lot of Tarantino fans. Like,
yeah, just heavier. I also think this movie talks about suicide a lot. There's like 5 or 6 mentions of it. There's like a joke about the one ghost like cutting her wrist. I'm just like, this edgy shit just like, again, just doesn't do anything for me. Like, I don't know what we're supposed to like take from that. Like, it's not, there's a lot of jokes about it and they're just jokes. And I don't really think it's funny. So there's a lot of stuff that just, a lot of the jokes in general in these movies, I don't think are funny. I think that like kind of holds them back for me.
Well, what do you guys have this rated?
3 stars.
I'm also at a 3.
4.5. So, but this is good though. This is a really interesting episode. Like all of us, it's kind of YouTube versus me, but interesting conversation. I like hearing your guys' perspective, and I hope kind of mine makes sense to you as well. What I get out of these. But our last conversation is also going to be interesting, Dan, because I didn't come out with a review for Beetlejuice. You don't know what I thought about it. I guess I mentioned it a little bit in this conversation. But I thought it was just the finest thing in the world. A solid 5 out of 10, 2.5 out of 5. Beetlejuice, the sequel that was 30 years in the making, basically, that originally, I believe they announced one or they had planned for one right after the original came out. And then it turned to this whole thing, I believe, with Beetlejuice in Hawaii was a movie that they were originally going to make. But what we got is basically Charlie, the father, I believe that was his name, the father of the Dietz family. He passed away, which they had to do that because the actor was a fucking creep. But basically that brings them all back to the town of Winter River and back to the Maitland's original home. And there, basically shenanigans go down and Beetlejuice is called on again. But this time you get to see a lot more of Michael Keaton. He's down there, kind of runs this kind of weird tax office, something like that. He has all these little henchmen that are working under him, which is pretty humorous. And there's this new element of his story where he's being not stalked, but haunted. No, I guess stalked is the proper word, by his ex-wife, Dolores, played by Monica Bellucci. And she's just constantly in the back of his mind throughout this entire thing, kind of just running through hallways in the Elseworld, just looking for him. So that's a little side plot. And then you also get the fact that Lydia now has a daughter in Jenna Ortega, whose character's name is Astrid. And what's really interesting is the fact that I thought this was a really cool idea, is the fact that Winona Ryder actually had a husband whose name was, can't remember his name, but had a husband, but they divorced. And right after they divorced, he passed away. So Astrid, knowing that her mother is a medium or can see ghosts and speak to ghosts, was like, hey, where the hell is my dad? Can you see him? And for some reason, Lydia can't. So that's why Astrid thinks that her mother's abilities are a complete scam and doesn't believe in them and doesn't want to believe in them because she loved her father. And I think that's a super interesting dynamic here. And then she also meets this boy who she falls for in Winter River, and shenanigans happen with him as well. Then you have Willem Dafoe, who's randomly in this movie as Wolf Jackson, which is really humorous. It's like this, I believe it's an actor who died, but now he's playing a detective in the Elseworld. Really hilarious performance by him. This movie would have been significantly less good if he wasn't in it. But Dan, I know you shared your thoughts briefly, on TikTok with your review. I don't know. I just feel like there's a lot going on in this movie. It does feel like they had a movie planned after the original came out. And then they had a lot of scripts over the years that they just combined into this. And I feel like there's a lot of characters that don't feel necessary. I would honestly, the focus between Astrid and Lydia, I wish was the whole movie. And I feel like
what
there's
characters don't feel necessary?
I got two big ones. Honestly, I think Monica Bellucci is not necessary in this. But how do you say that one?
Bellucci.
Bellucci?
Yeah.
Good Lord. You know why she's in this movie, Dan? I think you know why she's in this movie. Tell me why she's in this movie.
I don't know.
She's fucking dating Tim Burton right now. Ah, there it is. Oh, that makes sense. So,
But
Connor, let me get.
I will say quickly, without you just said how much you liked Willem Dafoe in the movie. He's in the movie because of her.
Yeah, that is true. Yes, I like Defoe, but I don't like her. It's just like a good and a bad. I mean, the only thing Monica Bellucci does in this entire film is just walk through hallways. That's all she does. And she finally meets Beetlejuice, and she's like, "I got you." And they're just like, "Fuck you," and she just is gone. But then also, I don't like the whole Jeremy plot line. I think that was really stupid. So Jeremy is the boy that Astrid, Jenna Ortega's character, comes into contact with. And I know, Dan, you're big on this. I think there's this weird conversation around the film community where people say that Cinema Sins has ruined film. And people think logistically and practically about these films. And that's just not how you're supposed to do it because they're movies. But what happens with Astrid and this boy that she meets, their character, it doesn't make sense to the Beetlejuice lore. It does not make sense. Because if you remember in the original story, who's the only person that can see the ghosts? It is Winona Ryder, because she's weird and she can believe, right, in the unbelievable. That's why she's able to see them. Again, in this movie, that's why she sees them, I would say, because Justin Theroux, which plays her boyfriend, named Rory, he thinks it's all a gimmick. He is lying to her and saying, "Oh yeah, I'll help you with." She has this new TV show where she can call spirits and talk to the spirits and stuff like that. They're very entertaining to her audience. But Justin Theroux, Rory, can't necessarily see the ghosts. He doesn't believe in them because that's the secret. You have to believe in order to see them. So I guess my big gripe is the fact that Astrid shouldn't be able to see Jeremy because she doesn't fucking believe in them. So that makes no sense. Also, she meets Jeremy's parents. She walks to this home and say, "Hey, that's my mom. That's my dad." You find out, spoilers for anybody who's listening. I don't think I've spoiled a bit, but spoilers, is the fact that his parents are dead and he's actually a serial killer or something like that. He murdered his family. But Astrid shouldn't be able to see any of them because she doesn't believe. I think that's something that can't be overlooked.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't know. I'm interested to hear what you say.
I think both these movies are just fucking ridiculous. I think if I wanted to go back and pick apart the original movie, I could with ease. They're both absolutely absurd comedies. So I think it's tough to I just think it's tough to apply that lens to this type of movie. That's just my own point of view.
I just wish they made Beetlejuice kind of, and he not necessarily isn't the villain of this movie or the first movie. Like I said, I think it's more Catherine O'Hara and the family, the Dietz. But I wish they would have just kind of made Beetlejuice the villain of this again, because you have three, Connor. You have three different villains in this. You have Monica Bellucci, you have Justin Theroux, Rory, and then you also have this Jeremy guy. You have three different villains in this movie who it's just too much. There's too much going on. And it's just chaotic, all these stories that they're trying to tell. And that's been the main criticism of this story. It really has.
You guys might be able to answer this for me, but was Alec Baldwin supposed to be back in this? And then he wasn't because of the whole thing where he shot someone on set?
Probably not. I mean, I don't think that he was going to be in this movie. There's no inclination that he was. There's nothing with the Maitlands really in it.
Yeah, those
Okay.
characters wouldn't really have a role. I I think I kind of liked how much this movie had going on. I feel like it's very frenetic and it's very like it's kind of scattered. But I feel like when the first movie was frenetic and scattered in its own way, but it didn't really work for me. This like really kept me engaged. I feel like every performance I was really enjoying, and I was like excited to see what was going on with each character. Um, I've seen some people criticizing Willem Dafoe. I thought he was having so much fucking fun, and like
Okay, I'm not that
I thought that
crazy.
was I thought that was really enjoyable. And Monica Bellucci, like I definitely hear what you're saying, and if they're together, like that's just it is what it is. But she is kind of she's pushing the plot forward. Like she's making Beetlejuice move around. She's like she is having an effect on the events of the story. She's not um, operating independently from everything else that happens. So if you look at it from a strict like writing perspective, like there is a point to her being there. And also with that, I think she's kind of like
That's the problem though. She is nothing. She is just something to keep. That's the only thing she is. She is something to keep the plot moving forward. That's absolutely right. Because once she finally right when it culminates, gone.
but she's also
Right away.
she's also Beetlejuice's origin story too. So that's like
Th-
that sequence I thought was fucking hilarious with him
yes,
speaking Italian like
that
that
was very
killed me.
good.
I thought that was incredible. So yeah, I mean she's also there to explain what he is, which when you get a movie like this, you're gonna get something to do with origin generally. So yeah, I couldn't get that, you know, worked up about any of the characters. I don't think Jenna Ortega was like incredible, but I don't think she was bad. I think she was completely fine. You know, it's not the liveliest performance, but she's good. Catherine O'Hara was hilarious. I liked Thoreau a lot. He was very, very slimy. And Winona Ryder, you know, has only gotten better as an actor. So yeah, I just thought it was really fun, and I think you know part of it maybe was I had really low expectations, but I also feel like you know, this is also a movie I didn't really necessarily want to like. Like, I don't like the director. I don't like a lot of his movies. So
Yeah.
I feel like I'm being honest and I'm being fair with it. And I enjoyed it. And I feel like, you know, is there some cringy shit? Like the Soul Train thing? Is that cringe as fuck? Like a direct response to, you think I'm a racist? Here you go. Here's 5 minutes. Like, with the most stereotypical shit anyone could think of. But, yeah, like I think he's cringy often, but that's who he is, and this is about as good as I could have hoped for it to be. I think so.
I mean, it's a little bit different, just our going into it too, because we've talked about it here. Like you said, you didn't have a lot of expectations because honestly, you don't necessarily love the first film that much. Whereas I'm different and I do really enjoy the first film. So I feel like we're kind of meeting in the middle in a way, you know?
Yeah,
And I will say something that I wish you talked about Jenna Ortega. Like, I think I've seen a lot of people say that she's incredible in this, a new star. I was like, she's just Wednesday. Like I wish like I'm nothing against her. I wish she had more to do in this movie. I think there is talent there, but because there is so many people in the story, you're just not going to get that from her. You're going to get the certain plot points that make sense, but besides that, that's it. Like I wish her and Lydia, her character and Lydia, the mother, got more time to interact because that's really what this movie is all about towards the end is that just the two of them bonding over what they went through in the story, but you don't necessarily get a whole lot of them interacting because they're separated most of the time, which you know drives the plot forward. But then also, it's just there's never really a conversation that ever happens besides "fuck, we almost just both died. Let's hug it out, dude." You know that's what brings them close together.
but all, I
And I
mean,
will say,
like, I also just think they come together with her dad, and like they just have that time together, and like there's an element of like closure there, and there's also an element of her seeing her mom see her dad, and you know being able to let go of whatever like resentment she was holding on to. I mean,
that is true.
and I also just think, you know, coming to realize that her mom wasn't full of shit in general, like, is important. It's funny because there's like a similar dynamic here to Big Fish, right? Like, at the core of it, there's a very similar dynamic in terms of seeing your parent as this like facade or this thing that they've created that you don't believe is real. In this movie, it's, you know, for financial gain. In Big Fish, it's really just become his personality. But yeah, it's about her kind of breaking through that. But here she actually does, and I thought that worked. I mean, I wasn't looking for like the craziest revelation here emotionally, but I thought it was enough, and I thought the story tied together in a fun way. I thought the sequence in the church was, you know, funny and creative, and I like the stop motion stuff. I like the sandworms.
I will say, it's funny that you mentioned that. I will say for me, I wish they would have done more new stuff. I mean, there's a lot of sequences in this film that you're kind of expecting from the first one. Like when it comes to the sandworms, when it comes to, I guess, the Bob character, whatever those little, you know, weird humans are called. In the lip syncing, I thought there was way too much lip syncing. They kind of overdid it, in my opinion, when it comes to this film. I will say the sequence where fucking Beetlejuice plays the guitar, I thought that was really funny. I thought that was really good by Keaton. Keaton did a really good job. But I think, you know, what can you add to the Elseworld? And honestly, the biggest thing they probably did add was that Soul Train sequence. I was like, this really isn't doing it for me. So that was really disappointing to see that. I guess Monica Bellucci's like character, the way she comes together and everything is really well done. That felt very Burton-y, and I thought kind of practical. It looked at the same time. My boy, that was good, and I thought, you know, my boy Danny DeVito, your boy Danny DeVito, got to be in the movie again a little bit. Good for him. But yeah, I just felt like it felt too safe when it comes to, you know, how much more they could do with this world that they built in the first one. I don't need to see the sandworm again. I really do. I feel like that's what everyone was expecting, but imagine if you showed something else really cool besides a soul train in this area, but you kind of didn't. I mean, the only sequence maybe is there's like this interesting, it looks like a airport terminal type area where they finally meet her dad and they're like checking passports kind of a thing. I'm like, that's kind of boring, but okay, I guess this is something new. But I don't know. I feel like there's some missed potential. I will say there's something with a baby. I thought the baby was fun.
Yeah.
There is a baby sequence. I did like the baby a lot. I'll leave it at that, Connor. I for you. There's a baby. I liked the baby. I thought that was really fun. So I will say it kind of reminded me of the animatronics in Alien Romulus. It might be an animatronic baby. It kind of looks like it.
Yeah.
It's probably just stop motion, but
at the end of the day, like, not a movie I'm going to go back to often or seek out or think about too much, but I did enjoy it. I had fun, so
it seems like a lot of other. I mean, I value my opinion. You know, I think obviously from my perspective that I'm right. I could be wrong, but I'm right about, you know, how I feel towards the movie. But I really don't care about my opinion when it comes to like how well a movie does at the box office. I don't care if it's a fucking sequel. I don't care if it's a legacy sequel. I just want people to be in the theater. If people are going and having fun. I was at a packed house for like the first time and the longest time. I sat on the side rather than the middle. Kind of pissed me off. Whatever. But I was just happy that there was just so many people there. I mean, this movie made, I think, $110 million at the box office this weekend domestically, which is insane. Like I said, the first one opened to 70, $80 million. So I'm just really happy that people were really looking forward to this film and that people did enjoy it. It's getting good reviews. So
yeah, that's all we can really hope for. Stringing together some wins at the box office and with movies that are at least like decent and made with care. So
yeah, supposedly, little snippet here for next week. Supposedly, there's another movie that is coming out this next week that Dan already watched that he says is a good movie. And for any of our listeners, we are going to be talking next week about Speak No Evil, the new Blumhouse film starring James McAvoy. And that actor is really going to be the focal point of our episode. We're going to be talking about Atonement, Filth, Days of Future Past, and what other one, guys?
Atonement, Filth, Days of Future Past, and Wanted. Yeah.
Wanted. Yep. And we're gonna have Kev
What,
of
did
the
you
Real
not
for
believe
Real.
me, Stone?
No, I didn't hear you, to be honest.
Didn't hear you either, Connor. Sorry.
Sorry. We're having Kev over the Real for Real on next week, so we're super excited about that. Episode will be out Monday, so be looking forward to that. But I kind of wanted to transition into what we do at the end of every single episode, which is recommend a movie. And honestly, before we got on to record, not before we got on, but today, I actually watched the original Speak No Evil. That came out in 2022. For anybody who is curious about where it is streaming, it is streaming on Shudder. So that is AMC Plus is, who houses Shudder and all of Shudder's movie. I believe it's a Shudder original, but I'm trying to look it up here. Speak No Evil is a Danish film. Okay, I was wondering what area of Europe it came from. It is a Danish film, but quite a bit of it, I know that puts some people off whenever a film is in another language, but quite a bit of it is in English. And I thought it was a really interesting watch. What the director is able to do atmospherically, I think, is really impressive. I think all the actors in it as well do a really great job. And you've watched it, correct, Dan, the original?
Yeah.
And you said that this new one that we'll be discussing next week does take some creative differences and liberties, and they're really effective.
In my opinion, yes. If you love the first movie, I don't know that you're going to love the second movie.
I don't love it. I don't love it. I think that it's so weird because I feel like there's a lot of unanswered questions for me for this movie. But the more I think about it, the more I kind of figure out what the filmmaker was trying to do. And just going into it, if anybody hasn't watched it, I think the original film is all about parenting. You see two different families, and both of these families, in a way, have a child, and they parent their child in very different ways. And because of the way they treat them, certain circumstances happen in the narrative. And it is a horror movie for sure. I do feel like it takes too much time for you actually to figure out what's going on. I think that's my biggest gripe with the movie. But I think it's a really solid film that you'll find really suspenseful. They do a brilliant job of just making you feel uncomfortable. But yeah, that's all I'll say now. If you're trying to prepare for Speak No Evil this upcoming weekend, like I said, it's streaming on Shudder. It's just a really solid watch. It's holding right now at a 3.3 on Letterboxd, and I think it's really appropriate. I'll probably give it a 3.5, I would say. I was writing my review right before you made this episode, but I think it is solid, and I'm super excited that, Dan, you said that this new one is pretty good. And I made a post about James McAvoy just talking about next week's episode. I don't know if you saw it, Dan, on Twitter, but I feel like James McAvoy, and we'll probably talk about it next week, it's just very interesting. I feel like he's an actor who has, an Oscar potential. It's just he doesn't really care about those roles. He just kind of goes out there, finds scripts that he's kind of passionate about, kind of feels different. Like his two movies this year have been the Book of Clarence, and then also Speak No Evil. Two completely different films that I didn't watch the Book of Clarence, but I'm assuming he was good at them. But yeah, I'm excited to talk about James McAvoy next week. But do you guys have any picks?
Yeah. My pick actually came from Big Fish because Dave Denman, I think is how you properly say it, is in it.
Roy from The Office.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of The Office.
I was like, hey, that's Roy.
He's in maybe one of my 5 favorite movies of all time. Easy stuff.
It's called Last Fly Flying. I'm just joking. I'm joking.
I will recommend that movie every chance I get that. No, it's a movie I've talked about a bunch though, and that's 13 Hours. It's a movie that was severely undershadowed by American Sniper and Lone Survivor, and I think it's the best of the 3 by far. It's about what happened to all of the soldiers in Benghazi in 2011. I've read the book. I have a signed copy by Chris Peranto behind me. And I've met Mark Oz before, who, if you've seen the movie, he's the guy at the end who his entire forearm is just in shambles, and he walks up onto the plane. John Krasinski's best role, arguably. That scene at the end when he calls his wife and he just breaks down is one of the most heartbreaking scenes to me in maybe any movie I've seen. It's absolutely one of my favorite movies of all time. And fun story, that came out when I was in high school. I was working at the movie theater, and the day prior, I think it was, I met with a Marine recruiter, and I went and saw 13 Hours with my mom. And we walked out of the theater, and she said, "I never want you to go into the military." I think it was like the next day I told her I wanted to go in.
Nice. Well, it's a thought that counts.
I haven't watched that in a long time. I need to go back and watch it.
After I finished Big Fish, I turned on 13 Hours just to rewatch it. I adore that movie.
That's a real big tonal shift there.
Yeah,
100%.
I'll say I looked it up for everyone. It's on Fubo right now. It's the only thing I can find that it's streaming on. But then also it's available to rent for $4 wherever you rent your movies as well. But I say, Dan, I think about out of all of us, you probably watch the most films and you give the most film recommendations, which is super cool. And I really appreciate you for doing that. So what do you got for us?
I rewatched a movie I hadn't watched in a long time, and that's The Apartment, which is streaming on Pluto TV, Tubi, Hoopla, and Roku. It's from, I think, 1960. We talked a while ago about Bernie on the Linklater episode, Connor, with Jeremiah, and the older woman who stars in that is Shirley MacLaine. But I mean, she was an incredible star for years, and she stars in The Apartment with Jack Lemmon, and it's regarded as, it's on a lot of lists when you look at some of the best movies ever made, and I think it deserves to be. Billy Wilder directed it. It's a very simple movie. It's 2 hours long. It's about this guy played by Jack Lemmon, who basically is kind of a drone. He's kind of like a corporate guy. He, basically works the equivalent of a cubicle job, kind of slaves away. He's very nice and affable, and his apartment where he lives essentially starts getting used by upper management at his company whenever they need it. So if they're, some of them are married and they might have an affair, so they'll bring someone to his apartment, or have a couple people for drinks and a little party, or whenever they need a space to just hang out or be for a while, they'll take his key and they'll use his apartment. So it's his life at home is getting absorbed into his life at work, and they're inseparable. And you see him just kind of he's a very nice guy, very likable. We see him kind of starting to break a little bit. And Shirley MacLaine's character plays, she works in the elevator in the building, and she's kind of someone that a lot of the guys are interested in, but she doesn't really give anyone time of day, kind of. So she kind of becomes a central point of the story romantically, but she's an awesome character. Kind of breaking away from a lot of stereotypes of women in these movies, a really a solid, strong character, but likable. And it's just kind of the story of this guy kind of finding himself, and maybe he makes his way out of the situation and stands up for himself, maybe he doesn't, and kind of his career and how it progresses. And yeah, it's just a great movie about life, that I would recommend. Like I said, it's on Tubi and Pluto TV and Hoopla, so definitely watch The Apartment.
Lots of free streaming services there. I think even Fubo, when I recommended Fubo for 13 hours, that's where it's streaming. I think Fubo is a subscription service, I believe.
Yeah, I don't know, honestly. But yeah, these are all free.
Yep. Awesome. That's always good to hear. Free's great.
Yeah, just we're right back to cable, right? With watching movies with ads, it's the same shit.
Yeah, I saw today that Max and Paramount Plus are thinking about combining. Which, out of all the streaming services, Paramount Plus and Paramount Plus and Peacock are definitely going to be the first ones to go. I don't know when they're going to go, but they're
dead. Yeah.
Isn't Peacock already basically just Prime?
No, I mean it's Universal. So Universal is a really big movie studio. So they do have a lot going for them. They have DreamWorks, they have Illumination, they have all their Universal movies. So it's a big studio.
They've made so many moves that just haven't worked. It's crazy.
Peacock originals.
Sounds like Tim Burton.
They had that series with Natasha Lyonne, the one that was made by what's his name? The one who directed Knives Out. Shit. Guys, you're supposed to help me here. Who directed Knives Out? Oh my gosh. Ryan Johnson. Good Lord. Ryan Johnson created like an original series with Natasha Lyonne called Poker Face. That's probably the best show on Peacock, just for anybody who's wondering. That's a good show. Good show. Adrian Brody's in it. He might win an Oscar this year. That's the first thing that comes to my mind. So
yeah, their big move was getting The Office because they thought people would come get subscriptions to watch The Office, and then nobody did. So
Connor did not get a subscription.
No, not a fan of The Office. Stone, earlier in the episode, though, you said you really like animation. If you haven't seen it, recommendation for you is A Silent Voice. One of my favorite animated movies I have watched in recent memory. Very good Japanese animation style.
I have heard of it, have not watched it. I need to really brush up on my anime. That's one thing I have not got into yet. I'm really getting into stop motion right now.
Okay.
Anime. There's just so much stuff out there that I could watch that I just need to get a proper kick into that stuff, and I will.
I'd say put that one pretty high for you. It's a very like heavy movie. I really enjoy it.
I posted about it on Twitter, but animation's fucking killing it this year. I think it's one of the best years of animation because even what's coming out, supposedly Transformers 1 is like pretty decent, but then you have Memoir of a Snail, which is another stop motion movie by the same person who made Mary and Max, a movie that I talked about, I made a video about really recently. Then you have The Wild Robot. You have a movie, like I said, from Latvian. What's that country called? Shit.
Latvia.
Latvia. I didn't even know that was, that's a very small country. That was like the first time I was aware of it, to be honest, Latvia. But I'm not a history guy or geography. So honestly, fun facts for all our listeners in college. This is kind of toot my own horn, but also shows you how dumb I is. There we go.
I took Freudian slip right there.
Yeah, I took world geography as an elective because I thought it would be easy. It was the only C that I got in college. So
damn.
Yeah, pretty rough there. Sorry, Latvia, to all of our listeners from Latvia.
Yeah, all zero of our listeners from Latvia.
But yeah, they have a movie. I would say they have a movie called Flow that is coming out that might get nominated. It'll be the first nomination ever for that country, which is super cool. But then also Lord of the Rings, The War of Rohirrim, which I'm super pumped about. I saw the trailer in IMAX and I was just like, duh, it looks so good.
Fun fact about geography is in 8th grade, my wife and I went to school together all through kindergarten. She won the geography bee in 8th grade, and I got yelled at for not clapping for her hard enough.
How old were you?
How old are you in 8th grade? Like 12, 13?
Were you dating?
No. I mean, we were friends.
You don't have to clap. Would you get yelled at by her?
No, by her teacher.
Oh, well, you can do whatever you want, Connor.
Yeah.
Did your wife take that to heart? Was she upset?
She gives me shit about it from time to time.
Well, I didn't even remember my wife's name, and I talked about her in front of her. So,
what?
But I didn't say anything bad. That's a story that she loves telling. So basically, I was talking to my friends. I met her in a lab at school, and I was like, "Hey guys, we should go ask Leah," because I knew there was some girl in the class named Leah that my friends were friends with. I was like, "We should go ask Leah this question," and they're like, "Stone, Leah's right fucking here." And I was like, "Ooh, what's up?" And now, 4 or 5 years later, got the ring on the finger.
My wife did tell me she loved me before we were ever dating, and I said, "This is a great movie," talking about Ratatouille. So
I remember that story.
Oh, bro, speaking of Ratatouille, Connor, big things on the horizon for your boy. I already sent it to Dan, but I wrote this like probably 2, 3, 4 minute long intro already for my first YouTube video, which is going to be about Ratatouille. We won't talk about that right now. What we will talk about to close the episode is everyone should go to our TikTok pages tomorrow. If you're listening to this episode will be out tomorrow, Thursday, the 12th. It actually just turned 12:01 a.m. But we're doing a giveaway that we're really excited about. We've been trying to put together and put a lot of interesting and really engaging items in it in celebration of our Batman episode that we recently posted in honor of us, just passing 100 subscribers on YouTube, but then also just doing this for a long time and appreciating everybody who has supported us along the way. So be on the lookout for that. We'll probably put those videos out tomorrow, just laying out the details of how to enter And then we'll actually, I believe, announce the winner on our episode that comes out on Monday, which will be the one, like I said, about Speak No Evil and James McAvoy. So be on the lookout for that. So watch the episode so you know who the winner is going to be. But be on the lookout for those videos. A good episode, boys. A lot of different perspectives on Tim Burton. The episode's done. We don't have to talk about Tim Burton again for a while. But I appreciate everybody listening to the very end and listening to us talk about our favorite things in the world, movies, even Tim Burton's movies. But until our episode comes out on Monday, our new episode, please go outside this week, touch some grass, sit on a park bench, and we will see you then. Peace out.